Welcome to another observability clinic, getting started with SLO, service level objectives, how to define your first SLOs with Dynatrace. Today I have Brian Chandler with me. Brian, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Andy? Glad to be here. Yeah. We just got done with Perform a couple weeks ago, I think, and we had a really good session kind of going through all of our SLO features and helping customers and users of Dynatrace building out their first SLOs. So I'm glad. I want to share this with the whole world now.
Exactly. And that's also the reason why I brought you on the show, because I heard so much great feedback, because it really helped people to get started with defining their topmost SLOs. And this is why I really want to hand it actually over to you. Show us what people learned in your 4 hours hands-on training day in a compact version. And folks, if anyone has questions later on, if you're watching the recording, you will be able, I'm sure, based on our names, to find us or find a way to reach out to us with questions. The easiest way is if you go to community.dynatrace.com with your questions, or if you find us on LinkedIn or social media, I'm sure you can also reach out directly to Brian. He doesn't mind. But with this said, Brian, please enlighten us. And if there is a question that I come up with or that I hear, then I will shortly interrupt you, but I try to let you run with your flow as good as possible.
Awesome. Sounds good. So let's just get going here. So what are we going to learn today? So I work with a lot of customers out in the field, and they always are asking for, okay, what are the best practices? We're starting our own SRE practice. What are good service level objective use cases? Or I have this XYZ use case. I've compiled really the top ones that I've seen and my colleagues have seen that most SRE practices out there are implementing when they're trying to use, SLOs or take advantage of SLOs in the Dynatrace platform. And I want to just make sure that we can go through all that today, make sure everyone's really equipped to hit on those. So the 8 you see, 8 is that my counter, right? Maybe 7. I don't know. Yeah, it looks like 7 or 8. We'll do one of that, some amount of that. Each of those are kind of the important use cases that we're going to go through today. And then at the end, if you stick around, this cool animated GIF I have here, or GIF image, whatever your pronunciation is, we'll create some dashboards with all these cool SLOs that we have here. So without further ado, I guess we'll just jump right into it. So some UI improvements before we jump into it. The actual examples, I just want to point out, we have had some good UI improvements lately in the platform. We've officially tied our SLOs to our Davis AI engine. So if our Davis AI engine detects some anomalies or something going on in the system, it'll actually tie that to the SLOs that they're associated with. Or if they're, it'll actually light up red. It's really great. You'll be able to drill right into it. So a big value add there beyond just having your SLOs. You'll actually have it tied into the fabric of our platform. So that's where that is today. We've also improved the ability to pick and choose and manipulate the SLI metric picker within the wizard in our SLOs, which we're going to go through today. So we're going to see a lot of use of this, but the idea here is we're really maximizing the amount of flexibility users have to manipulate the data and calculate exactly how they want their SLIs to be within there. The next is we have a really cool, I think, and we're bragging about this through all of our examples here, is an entity filter. So we have an entity filter, in our SLO wizard that you might have been familiar with. Before, you kind of had to know your entity within the Dynatrace UI, where to find it kind of ahead of time. We have this really cool preview feature now that'll allow you to kind of preview and search entities. So it just helps ease of use wise, that I really like. We've kind of changed up the UI a little bit to more easily make it more readable on how to manage your error budgets when you're defining your target and warning error budgets. So I think that's really cool here. And then the most importantly, what I like is this evaluation. So as you're going through the wizard at the end of putting in your configuration, you'll actually be able to kind of pre-evaluate your settings. So you can kind of sanity check yourself before you go ahead and hit create on your SLO, and then it has some crazy number that you don't recognize, and then you're going and fumbling around and figuring out why it's not reporting correctly. So you'll be able to pre-evaluate your settings for your SLOs. So those are just some highlights of the UI that I wanted to put out there. We're making releases every 2 weeks still, so we'll just continuously keep improving this based on your feedback. So if you ever have any feedback, always feel free to tweet at me or send it to our product team or in product chat, or your account team, right?
Brian,
So,
one more thing
go
maybe
ahead.
to interject here, because this perfectly fits what you just said in terms of feedback on community, on community.dynatrace.com. In a discussion forum, there is actually a thread where the product management team around Wolfgang Heider is actually giving you also not only the chance to give them feedback, but also gives an update on what's currently planned on the roadmap and when are certain things coming. And I think that's also very important. So this is why I can just reiterate, if you have any feedback, community.dynatrace.com is a great place to be. And I really like the way you walk through these UI changes, because the last time the two of us did one of these performance clinics on SLOs, it's just been a couple of months ago, but a lot of cool things have been improved, and therefore it's great to see. But now let's jump into it. I think you have 7 SLOs, at least 7, if we counted correctly, to go.
Yes. All right, let's do it. So this is going to be, are you going to be timing me, Andy? Is that what's going on here? We're going to see how quick we can fire off these SLOs.
Short videos seems to be the thing to go, because attention span is getting shorter, and therefore the shorter the better.
That's right. Okay, so let's get into it. So basic service availability. That's going to be the first one that we're going to go into. So I'm going to pull over my Dynatrace environment, and looks like I already have 8 SLOs created here. I'm actually going to go in and delete all of them, and then see how quickly I can recover all of that. So I deleted all my work. Oh no, but we're going to quickly create 8 of them. So the first one is going to be basic service availability. So what this one is around is, if you have a service in Dynatrace, it's, maybe an API, it's tracing transactions. In our case, we have like a travel website, right? And I'm going to grab one of these services. We want to basically just measure the or create an SLO based off the overall availability of the entire service. And this service is going to be a front end service. Our app here, or sample app, is called Easy Travel. It's basically a travel website. It's a full stack app. It's got all sorts of middleware and APIs and things. We're going to create an SLO off of its front end service. So that's going to be our front end SLO, right? So the cool thing about our wizard is Dynatrace is collecting all sorts of data. As you know, if you're a Dynatrace user, it has service level data, process host level data, application telemetry, right? So what we've gone in here in our product management is actually built in some kind of basic pre-templatized definitions that you can kind of click on. In this first example, we just want to make a basic service level availability SLO off of our front end. And we actually, Dynatrace has hundreds of built-in metrics within that get collected when you install the one agent or integrate the one agent somehow into your application. It starts collecting data, trace data. In this case, the built-in service metric of success count and total count are going to be the SLIs that we use for our SLOs here. So it makes it really easy if you want to just create a basic service level SLO. So I'm actually going to just really quickly show you the service that we're creating this SLO off of. So if I go on my left-hand side here, I'm going to go to services, and I'm going to go look at my front end. It's called Easy Travel Customer Front End, I believe. So you can see it right here. Dynatrace is already tracking how many requests are going through. We have some failures, but we really want to track an SLO off of it. So what I'm going to do is just kind of take note of this name. Now you can filter by tags and things like that as well. But I'm going to basically just demonstrate, what the entity filter looks like if you want to use a name. But then we'll get into tags and entity IDs and a couple of other examples. So just to kind of walk through this wizard again, just to recap, what we're doing is we're defining some SLIs. In this case, it's the success over total count. That's going to give us how many successful requests are occurring, dividing that into our total count, multiplying by that 100, and then we're going to try to get a normalized, basically percentage of how many successful requests are hitting this front end service. Then what we're going to do is we're going to tell Dynatrace, okay, we want to scope this into just our easy travel customer front end that we want to create this SLO off of. So in the filter down here, it's going to be type service, and then the entity name. Go ahead and go in here. We're going to plop in our entity name. And what we're going to find is our easy travel customer front end service. What I really like here is we've improved here. If we hit this preview button, it'll actually kind of do a little bit of a search almost. You can verify that this is in fact correct. So we took our SLIs, which is just success over total. And then we're going to scope it into just the front end service that we want to, because as you know, if you're a Dynatrace user, you're probably monitoring hundreds of services out there in the world, right? And then the last thing we have to do is actually define our error budget. So, basically you'll be working with your internal teams, trying to decide, hey, like what is an appropriate amount of failure that this service should have, right? So this being a critical front end service for our website, and then in talking with our management teams and our dev teams and our app owners, we're actually going to stick with this 99.98% target, right? Meaning we're giving 0.02% room of failure for this to still be in, say, compliance. And then we're going to start warning once it starts seeing 0.01% of failure on the service. So we're expecting some pretty high reliability on this service. So we defined the metrics in Dynatrace, which these are going to be kind of our SLI here. And then we scoped it down to which entities in Dynatrace that this is going to apply to. And then we talked about our error budget. Okay. So if we go and hit evaluate, Dynatrace will actually say, okay, well, based on the inputs you've put there, this is what it would look like. Are you okay with this? This looks about right. We're going to go ahead and hit create. So there you go. That's our first SLO. Not too bad, I don't think, so far. Again, this is across the entire service. And then we're going to do some other use cases where we're going to scope it down into different API calls. I don't know, how easy was that, Andy? Everything good there?
That was pretty smooth. Just 2 comments.
Yes.
I started educating people to not only give it a good name, but also a description. You can also describe your SLO, because then it shows up and saying something like, in your case, the success ratio of requests that are handled successfully by your service, because that's basically the SLI that you define. So the total number of successful requests divided by the total requests, and that's your success metric. So giving I think a name is good, or a description is good. And the other thing, I really like the way that you are using the name as a filter. And I know when we discussed about this performance clinic or observability clinic, I told you, names is great, but I think I would rather like to use tags and management zones. And I'm pretty sure you will cover some of this. And you mentioned this, in order to scale this, you can also use tags here, which is really powerful then. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And yeah, we're definitely going to have some examples where you tags. And I like to go through all of the different, options of filters, right? Because some folks, they might say, I just want to get started with some SLOs and stuff. But yes, absolutely. Once you actually start getting a good mature practice with this, like you said, you want to definitely get into using tags for your filters. So let's go into the next one. So that was your basic service level availability. All right. So that's kind of your first SLO there. Okay. So the next one's going to be a little bit more that I see in the field the most, honestly. So it's one thing to create an SLO off of an entire service, but if anyone's worked in any apps or IT organizations in general, that's not scoped in enough, honestly. Like the first thing a customer will say, okay, that's great, but really what I need is to create an SLO off of this specific API request on this service, because the developers just introduced it, or the different teams have different business needs. So I get this request a lot in there. So let's go into that. So it's gonna be our second one here. So it's gonna be a single request availability, and this one's really popular again. So first, let me just kind of describe what we're gonna do. Let's go back to our easy travel, customer front end service. All right. So, and if we drill into this service, what we'll see if we go into view dynamic requests, you can see that Dynatrace automatically discovered all of the different endpoints and API calls that are going to be made. So again, a really popular thing that a lot of customers run into is say, I want to create an SLO just off of a single one of these requests. And the scenario that we're going to talk through is that today is, basically we had an app team that introduced a new calculate recommendations, functionality on our app, and you want to create a new SLO off of it. So now that we're in this easy travel customer front end, I'm basically going to demonstrate how you can create an SLO off of this. So there's a couple ways to do this. The first way is you could mark this as what we call a key request, where Dynatrace will then kind of treat that single request as sort of a first-class citizen, give it its own baselines, its own anomaly detection and things like that. I'm going to demonstrate it a slightly different way because and it's going to be off of what's called creating a couple calculated service metrics, because I think what you're going to be running into with a lot of your use cases in general as an SRE is you're going to be asked to do a lot of different use cases, corner use cases, more complex than even this at some point, and utilizing calculated service metrics is a really powerful tool to enable you to create the SLIs that you need. So what we're going to do that is I'm going to filter this out just by clicking on calculate recommendations. We have our request right here. And then if I go over here to the right and I click on this little chart, create analysis view button, what that's going to do is it's going to open up a multi-dimensional analysis for us. And this actually will help us create a metric off of this specific request that Dynatrace is going to start recording, which then in turn we're going to use as our SLI when we go to create the SLO. Okay, so that's what we're doing right now. So I went down into the multi-dimensional analysis with the request that I want to create this SLO off of, and I'm going to create actually two calculated service metrics here. So the first one is we want to create a metric that simply counts the amount of requests, the total requests up against this specific request. So we're going to drop that down to request count. And then if we click on create metric, we're going to go ahead and name that a metric name. So calculate recommendations count. I'm just going to call it that. It's kind of arbitrary. What that'll do is it'll create and register a metric for this. Again, what it's doing is it's just going to create a metric in Dynatrace as a total count of the calculate recommendations. You'll then hit create metric. I'm not going to do that right now because I already created these metrics, but basically you'll just click that and you'll see a, hey, success, you did it. Okay, so once you create that, we want to create our numerator in our SLO calculation, right? So again, we want to divide the successful requests into the total requests, which is eventually will give us our SLO measurement. So we got the denominator right there, which is the total count. Now we want to create basically a numerator off of that. So basically what we're going to do is switch that to successful request count. We'll create a metric off of that. And I could just call it calculate recommendations success count. So once you have that filled out, you'll click create metric again. And at that point in time, you'll have two metrics that we're going to use to build out our SLIs for our SLO off of this specific request. So that's kind of the pre-work there. And this is going to be kind of the important part. And you're actually going to use this a lot, not just in these use cases, but other use cases that you'll find out. And this calculated service metric is very powerful for this. And we have another example that we're going to use later on for this as well. So once you create those two metrics, you're going to go back to your service level objectives menu on the left-hand side. You're going to go to add new SLO again, right? And then in this case, what we're going to do is name this SLO calculate recommendations SLO, right? So we want to create just off of that. And then in here, what we want to do is use our new metric picker here to find our numerator and denominator metrics that we just created that we're going to use as our SLI. Okay. So basically what we're going to do is just say, because we want to normalize it to dual an integer percentage. We're going to find our two metrics that we created. So in order to do that, you're going to explore the metrics that we just created. Now you'll notice what I like is Dynatrace has a bunch of built-in metrics. We're not going to use one of those, but it categorizes them very well. So like if you want to do a built-in service metric off of database connection errors, all that stuff, that's great. But you can also search for the calculated metrics that you created by just typing in calc, right? And what we can see here is our metrics that we created. So what we're going to want to do, again, is grab our numerator metric, which is our calculate recommendations success count. Okay. And you're going to have to add, in this case, sum at the end of this, which I'll explain that in a moment. Don't panic. We have to do that. And then what you're going to want to do then is put in your denominator, which is going to be your total count of calculate recommendations. So what we've done now is we've taken our success, divided that into our total, multiplied by 100. We're going to get a 2-digit percentage there. Now with this one, this is where I usually quiz my students here, Andy. We actually don't need to scope the entity filter down to anything. How come? Do you know why, Andy?
Well, I assume because the metric in this case is only being calculated anyway for your easy travel frontend for that particular endpoint, and therefore no need to filter it any further down.
There we go. That's why we keep you around. So that's why we get nice. Yes. So basically, again, when you pick your metrics, you then still need to define which entities in Dynatrace that applies to. But because we created those metrics off of an entity, a single entity already in the first place, there's nothing more to filter it down to. And when I say entity, if you're familiar with the Dynatrace Smartscape, an entity is basically any of those things you see on there. It could be a host, a process, a service, application, etc. Right? Okay. So once that's done, you also probably want to pick your evaluation period. A lot of the times this is, a lot of customers make this kind of their release cycles, right? That's why it defaults to a week. If you're a monthly release cycle organization, it's up to you. It's kind of arbitrary, but it depends on the goals organizationally and team wise with folks. So we're just going to go ahead and leave that as last 1 hour, and then we'll hit evaluate. And then there we go. We'll see our evaluation here. So I created a 2% error budget. I figured this is kind of this calculate recommendations is kind of a new thing here. We want to be able to give them a 2% error budget leeway. Might be a little too loose for them, but hey, we're going to give them some slack, right? So that's our second SLO there. So we went from the entire service, we scoped that down to a single request, and that's number 2. Any thoughts there, Andy, so far before we move on to the next one?
Now, just recapping, and I agree with you that this is a very important use case. So you are responsible for a service that has, let's say, 10 or 100 endpoints, but only a couple of them are really important for you, where you have an SLO or where you want to have an SLO. And therefore, what you basically showed us is say, hey, Dynatrace, don't just give me the success rate of all the requests for the service, but I want to have the success rate for a certain endpoint. How do we calculate the success rate? We are taking the total number of successful requests to a particular endpoint, divided to the total number of requests on that endpoint, multiplied by 100, define the threshold. Voila, here we go. And you showed us the whole thing through the calculated service metric option. And as you said, there's also the option through the key requests, but really great. Works for me. The only thing that you missed is a good description for the SLO.
Yes. I know. Well, I don't know. I like to keep everyone on their toes, guessing and stuff. That's why they always have to come to me, and I know everything. That's why, I don't want to actually give people helpful things. But no, you're right. I should put in some descriptions. It's a good thing. So the next one is going to be a response time based SLO. Okay, so this one, again, this is probably the second most popular SLO request and that I see customers asking for. That burgeoning SRE organizations start getting into. So if you think about this, the use case here is you're your teams, your app dev teams or whatever are, introducing a new service, somewhere along the line, you'll have to decide what is an appropriate amount of response time for this service to be able to, service the rest of the organization, right? So like if you introduce an API call that, lasts 3 seconds and it needs to last 3 seconds in order for the entire app to work, because it could be a dependency of like 5 other things. It's really important to not just measure whether or not that request is successful, but that it's successful in the sense that it hits a response time threshold. So we're actually going to consider in this case a request that might return a 200 response code, but it's still considered a failure in the eyes of our SLO because it doesn't hit a certain response time requirement. So what we're going to do in this one is actually create an SLO off of that. And the case here, if I go back to Dynatrace here, is our travel booking company is trying to book travel. COVID's kind of starting to go away, and well, it's still with us, but things are kind of getting back to normal. People are going traveling, right? And we are a very competitive travel agency, and we want people to come to our website to book things, because if they don't, then we're going to be losing out on a lot of money. So we want to make sure our booking transaction, when people go to click checkout, actually is fast. Otherwise, we know that they're just going to leave us and go to another booking agency if our website isn't fast, right? Because people are wanting to go skiing, after all this time. So I'm going to go back to our Easy Travel customer front end service here, and I'm going to find our critical booking transaction. So if I go to our view web requests and scroll down, we have our orange booking finish transaction here. Now, this is the transaction that folks, basically this is when money hits us, right? So folks went through the website, they bought they have their tickets in the shopping cart, and they said, clicked on charge my credit card, let's go. That's this transaction right here. So it's critical that this transaction comes in at least within 5 seconds. That's what the business has decided, and that's what we're going to create our SLO off of. Now, if we kind of analyze the data here a little bit on the out of the box thing, we'll see that, we definitely do have some of these transactions clocking in at 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 14 seconds. And we really want to start tracking that and understanding how that's impacting everything, and helping inform our dev teams whether or not they should keep releasing, or do we need to go back and maybe fix some of this technical debt, right? And we need to decide, are we degrading over time, or are we improving on this? So what we need to do then is kind of go back to that multi-dimensional analysis view for our booking finish transaction. Now, if we go ahead and click on that, and you can actually see here, we have, basically this view filtered out just for that booking finish. And we're going to click on multi-dimensional analysis view here. And in a similar fashion, what we want to do is create request count calculated service metrics. Our denominator is actually going to be the same as the last one, because again, your denominator is you want to, in this case, is all the transactions, and then you want to make your numerator basically the criteria of success, right? So the denominator is just going to be the count of requests coming through for our orange booking finish transaction. If I click on create metric, I'm just going to call that booking finish count, right? So when you go ahead and type that out, you'll click on create metric. I'm not going to, because I already created it, but it's there. And then next, what you're going to do, and this is kind of the trick to this whole thing, what you want to do is now count the amount of transactions that come in under our response time criteria. So in order to do that, I'm going to click inside our filter menu right here, and I'm going to scroll down to response time. Okay. And we're going to tell Dynatrace, show me or count the amount of orange booking transactions that came in under 5 seconds or equal to 5 seconds. Okay. So now we're just counting those amount of transactions that are underneath 5 seconds. That's going to be our numerator for our SLI here. So I'm just going to call that booking finish acceptable count. So we're going to divide the amount of transactions that are successful, the ones being under 5 seconds, into the total amount of orange booking finish requests. So once you've created those two metrics, we're going to use that to construct our SLI for this. So if we go back to service level objectives, we go to add new SLO. This one is going to be booking finish response time SLO. And the description here is we need to make sure that our booking transactions are fast. Otherwise, Andy will fire me. In the description there. No, but really, you probably actually put a good description in there. What the, maybe what the use case is here. We're actually understanding what this SLO is. And then what we're going to do is similar to our last one is we're just going to go ahead and construct our metric picker here. And in this case, what we're going to find is our calculated metrics that we just created. And we're going to go ahead and divide our successful booking transactions, which again are transactions that are coming in 5 seconds or less, and divide that into the total count. All right. Now, sometimes when I'm creating, like when I was first getting into this and trying to wrap my head around understanding the response time style SLOs, it can kind of, it's a pitfall you can go into when you're creating these calculated service metrics. You like want to create a response time metric, but that's not what you're doing here. You're creating a count of request metric with the criteria of 5 seconds or less. So those are the metrics we created here. And that's just commentary on why that's important there. So once you have that, your numerator and denominator there, and go down here, you can define your time frame. Looks like we have week-long release cycles, so I'm going to stick with that. This one also doesn't need an entity filter. We're going to go into some examples where we'll have more entity filters here, but this one also doesn't need one because it's already scoped down into our booking finish transaction. And the success criteria is the businesses came in and said, we want 98% of our transactions to come in at least under 5 seconds. Now, in a lot of organizations, really best practice is you really should be striving for, basically you want to find an SLO and error budget that's within a couple nines here, so 99.99. But just to kind of demonstrate, what some different colors look like on the SLOs, I'm just going to kind of make this a little bit less constrained. So we're giving ourselves a 2% error budget effectively here, meaning that we're going to allow 2% of the booking transactions to come in over 5 seconds. So once we're good with that, we're going to go ahead and click evaluate. So it looks like we're actually not doing great on our error budget right now. Only 89.777% of the booking transactions are coming in under 5 seconds. If we go ahead and create, we can actually see the current status of that. We're over our error budget big time. So this is where, we would say, okay, maybe we shouldn't do the next release. Maybe we should go back and try to fix our booking transaction here. But that's what that SLO is there. So far we've done 3 of them. Again, a full-on service SLO across all transactions, a single transaction SLO just for availability, and then one based on response time. Is that making sense so far, Andy?
Makes a lot of sense, and it's great that you described the description. I'm not going to fire you because you're doing an awesome job. And give you a little heads up, we are about 5 minutes each on each SLO that he created, maybe 5 to 6 minutes on each. So keep going.
All right, let's keep going. All right, so the next one is we're going to go into synthetic tests. So I'm not going to do a whole dissertation on what a synthetic test is. Hopefully folks know what they are, and we'll just create some SLOs off them. Basically, they're just robotic tests up against your services or websites. So this one's basically just more, I want to help demonstrate to everyone the different filters that we have. So I created some synthetic tests across a few websites here, Dynatrace.com and ABC.com, which is just an American news website. And what we're going to do is we're just going to show a couple of different entity filters that I think are useful to create SLOs off of. You'll notice that I actually added a tag to a couple of my tests here. So we're going to utilize that as one of my entity filters. And so if we go over to synthetics, or SLOs, I should say. So service level objectives, we're going to add a new SLO. So this one is great because we do have kind of an out of the box synthetic availability SLO, which is basically just going to pull out our built-in synthetic availability metric. So it's going to just give us a metric based on, is it working or is it not? And this SLO, I'm just going to call it synthetic Dynatrace. Actually, do we allow dots in there? Because we'll see. I'll just want Dynatrace SLO. It's going to be for the website, right? So just for our Dynatrace.com. That's what this SLO is going to be off of. And then what we're going to do is this time define a filter. It's going to be a synthetic test type entity in this case. And this is kind of one of the cool tricks I like to use for this. So if I go ahead and click, say, preview, because we made the entity selector just this single type, it's going to return all the different synthetic tests that I have. So if I'm struggling to remember a name or a tag or something for a specific entity that I'm trying to create a filter off of, you can almost use this entity selector as sort of a search in a way. So I actually want to create this specific SLO off of, this name, for example. I could pull that out. But what I'm going to do actually is just kind of leave it as type, because I actually want the SLO to be hitting all of the tests. And then the next one we're going to create, I'm going to use a tag as a filter as well. So this specific entity filter is going to just go ahead and grab all the synthetic tests that we've created. I'm just going to go ahead and leave our success criteria and our filter, our time filter, or valuation time frame. I'll just go ahead and leave that as last 1 hour. And then I'll just go ahead and make this SLO off of all of the synthetic tests. So if I hit create, you'll see that it's evaluated. It's found our current number here. It's just using our built-in synthetic availability metric. And I go ahead and create here. You'll see here that right now our status is pretty bad. It's actually tied to a problem. You can see that Dynatrace has actually noticed that, hey, one of your synthetic tests that you're creating this SLO off of is tied to a problem. So that's an interesting thing there. You could actually click on that and go to the problem. Now I'm going to create a second SLO here based on synthetics, but this time what I'm going to do is actually add a tag filter to it. So this is going to be, like Andy was saying, probably best practice. If you have your tagging strategy and everything, worked out in your organization, if you're kind of a bigger enterprise, you want to make sure that you have proper tags on everything. And what this is going to be is also a synthetic availability, but this time inside the entity filter, what we're going to do is add one of our tags in there. So I actually just named it my tag, nothing fancy. But what you'll see here is by adding this tag to the entity filter, it went and grabbed the two synthetic tests that I had tagged with this my tag here. So just kind of demonstrating from an enterprise-wide using tags, because otherwise you'll have to memorize all these entity IDs and display names, and it's just untenable when it comes to managing all these different SLOs and things. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as default 99.98% success criteria there, and we'll go ahead and evaluate. You can see things are going great. We'll go ahead and hit create. So there you go. So we've made one with just a standard filter off of all synthetic test types. Then we add some tagged tests. And then I'm going to do one more with synthetics, because I think this one is good to demonstrate off of entity types. So this was a synthetic test SLO. That's if you just kind of have standard browser tests, but there's also synthetic tests where you can make them multi-step with many different pages being loaded for your end users. So now what we're going to do is filter down to an entity ID in the entity filter and find a specific test step within our browser test and make an SLO off of that. So if I go back really quick to our synthetic tests, I had that multi-step test off of abc.com. It's got 3 steps in it. And if I scroll down here, you'll see that it loads the home page, it clicks on news, and it clicks on schedule. Okay. I want to create an SLO specifically just off of this news test step. Okay. So if I go in there and I click analyze, this is like kind of the super secret way to get to what's called an entity ID. It's not super secret, but it's a really handy way to do it. So any entity you drill into in Dynatrace, up here in the URL address bar, this entity will have a unique ID. So in this case, it's going to be this synthetic test step, entity ID. And this is basically going to be the event entity ID of this step that we want to create the SLO off of. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy that. Okay, because we're going to use that as our filter. And that's what I'm just kind of demonstrating here, the different types of filters that you can use within your SLOs. So I'm going to create a new SLO. And in this case, what we're going to do is synthetic test step SLO, because we want it to news page SLO, because again, we just want to measure the SLO off of the specific news page on there. And then within the filter, and I'll add the metrics here in a second, but this is kind of the important part. Within the filter, we want to make this type synthetic. Oops, if I can spell it right. Oh, geez. I don't know if I can see if that works. Uh-oh. Maybe we're some. I swear I knew how to spell in elementary school, but maybe I lost my way to do that. Oh, synthetic test. That's what we want to do that. So that's going to be synthetic test, but it's going to be actually, you know what? Let's just do it right off the entity ID. So let's go entity ID. There. Just see if that works, and I'll explain what's going on. There we go. So what I did is I was very surgical about picking the entity, that click on news event within the synthetic test. And in this case, what I did is I went and grabbed that unique ID, and in the entity selector, one of the options is if you want to just use that unique ID, you can go ahead and find that, plop that in there, and you can see when I hit preview, it found my click on news event. So that's what we did there. So again, just another option of finding entities within the entity selector. Now within our metric, I've actually gone ahead and just kind of pre-built this out. This is going to also use a built-in metric here. And this is going to be event success metric. And this is, again, the built-in metric for success for a specific step within a test. Okay. So if you can pause the video here, if you're watching on YouTube or something, and kind of see if this is what you want to create an SLO off of a single step within a synthetic test. These are the built-in metrics you would use here. Okay. And then you would go in and actually put in the entity ID of that specific test step. In that case is what I did here. So if we go ahead and create, that's a specific step within a full test there. So how was that, Andy? You got making sense so far? Got a couple more.
A lot of sense, and I am really excited because I learned something new. I did not know that an individual test step of a browser synthetic test is its own unique entity ID, and that's cool.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, the Smartscape. We got lots of different things that we treat as their own kind of their first class citizens, and that's kind of the cornerstone to our AI, which is pretty cool. Yeah. All right, I just got a couple more. I know we got to cruise through here just a little bit here. So real user monitoring, SLO. This one's pretty straightforward. In our website here, we have a front end website that folks are going to, and they are booking travel. They're clicking on website things, right? So actual the end user browser performance that we're tracking of all the end users. We want to create an SLO off of that. So one of the things that Dynatrace out of the box tracks is this thing called AppDex. Now, AppDex is kind of an industry standard for web performance. And in short, it calculates what's a satisfied click. And out of the box, that considers something 3 seconds or less with no errors. And then a frustrating action would be something like that was really, really slow and had some errors on it. So the out of the box, like pre-templatized user experience, SLO or SLI that we use is our built-in metrics for satisfied clicks in our AppDex category. And then we're going to divide that into the total amount of user actions. Again, those could be like clicks, taps, swipes, whatever that is, whatever the end user is using. So that's going to be real user monitoring, SLO, and we're going to use the out-of-the-box user experience. This is for the front end. Now for filter, we're actually going to use type application. Okay. And we're then going to use the name of our application. And again, I'm going to do that little trick here where it's like, oh, shoot, I forgot the name of my application. So I just wanted to kind of search for all the applications I have defined. And okay, I want to make it off of Easy Travel. So if I do entity name, and I go ahead and name it Easy Travel, there you go. So now that would be the filter if you wanted to create an SLO off of AppDex measurements off of a specific application. I'm going to go ahead and leave this as the default error budget definition there. We'll leave it as 1 week evaluation time frame. Go ahead and click evaluate. Looks pretty good to me, although our website's not doing great right now, apparently. So we'll go ahead and create. There we go. That's real user monitoring. So we got 7 SLOs. You got time for one more, Andy, or are we hitting time here?
No, I got time for one more. It's really cool because I know what's coming next, which is an exciting one too.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So this one's going to be a little bit different. This one is going to be more around infrastructure. So this whole time we've been talking about service level SLOs like response times, failure rates, end user experience, synthetic tests. This one's going to be more based on the performance of your infrastructure. So this one's a little bit different. And kind of the use case here, what I usually talk to customers about is kind of around the cloud budgeting area, right? So one of the things that if you have a cloud project going on in your organization, and you guys are basically given a budget to spin up some servers and deploy your apps on, you want to make sure you're using all those cloud resources efficiently, right? So, let's say you're spinning up a compute node and you're paying, $500 a month or whatever it is, whatever that ends up costing, and it's only sitting at 2% CPU. Well, you're not utilizing your infrastructure, and you're basically just throwing some money out the window. So the infrastructure capacity SLO, I like to kind of frame this as making sure that your users are efficiently using the compute resources that they're paying for. So if I go back to Dynatrace here, this one's pretty straightforward. I'm going to have, in my environment, I just have one host. I know most companies and organizations have lots and lots of hosts. That's where the importance of having tags, and Andy had mentioned earlier, is good here. So if I go over to service level objectives, I want to create an SLO off of the CPU usage of that host that I'm paying AWS for. And I want to know that I'm actually utilizing the CPU compute that I'm actually paying for. So this is going to be CPU SLO. Want to make sure we're not throwing money away to AWS, right? So basically in this case, what we want to do is actually go ahead and grab just our built-in CPU host metric. Again, Dynatrace has tons of built-in metrics, and this one right here is just the built-in one. And what we're going to actually do in that case is normally, this is where I would tell folks that you want to make sure that you put in a tag filter. So if you had a group of hosts within AWS, let's say you tagged them by, availability zone, and you had a specific AZ that you wanted to target a group of hosts to make sure that they're using the CPU as efficiently as you want them to. You could put in a tag or an automated tagging rule that would tag hosts based on what availability zone they're on. Just as an example. In this case, I just have one host in my entire environment. I don't have any tags on my hosts, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave that blank there. Now, in the error budget, now this is going to be a little bit different the way we're going to use the error budget here. Now, it's not going to be kind of in the same sense we'd be using the error budget over, with the service level objective. In this case, our error budget is going to be essentially the amount of CPU that we're not using on a host. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want to make sure that our hosts are at least using 60% of our CPU. And we have an error budget of 40% CPU that we're allowing to sit idle on the hosts that we're paying for. So our error budget here is basically the CPU that you're not using on a host. It's a little bit different kind of to think about, but that's going to be kind of how that's working there. And in this case, what you're going to see is once we hit evaluate, we'll kind of see the current status of that. And what I can tell you right now is it looks like I might be overpaying, and I could probably downsize my particular host right here. Right. So that's kind of the thought behind it. Again, it's a little bit different. You might, if you're reading maybe the SRE handbook that Google wrote, maybe that might not be an example that you may have read about. But again, I'm getting teams, asking me in the field, how can we keep track of, costs, and how can we kind of take this SLO feature and actually, in how, our organizations have learned how to use it and integrated it into our processes. How can we apply that to, infrastructure related use cases, and even like, maybe maintaining costs and things like that. So I just thought that was a very interesting one that I saw out in the field there, and I want to kind of make sure I share that with folks there. So that's kind of the infrastructure one. So what do you think? We got one more thing. I'm going to show them maybe some dashboards here. Any thoughts you have on the infrastructure side of things?
I'm really fascinated about this use case, because I think you're spot on here. A lot of people that I talk to are afraid that they are not utilizing these resources enough and just paying for it. So I think it's a completely valid use case. And whether you're using a dashboard with a threshold there or the SLOs, I think the SLOs are great because they are just giving you not only the visualization, but I think it's a great reporting opportunity as well here. So it's great. Yeah. Let's
perfect.
Brian, I'll give you another, let's say 3 to 5 minutes for some dashboarding, and then we'll wrap it up.
Let's do it. All right. So let me pull Dynatrace back over here. So we made all these pretty SLOs. This is great. We have an awesome out of the box kind of reporting framework here, right in the product on service level objectives on the side here. But let's say we want to create a dashboard out of it. So there's a couple options here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and pick one of our SLOs, and I'm going to pin it to a dashboard. And I actually think I want to create a new one. And if I go ahead and hit pin and open that dashboard, I'm now going to have an SLO tile. And this is going to be my SLOs, or it's an easy travel critical, if I can spell, SLO overview. We'll go ahead and kind of name it that. Now, we kind of had an out of the box tile here, which has a bunch of really great options. We have kind of a legend, metric names that you can base it off of. You can actually edit the amount of decimals that it reports on. if we want to clean this up a little bit, I'm just going to, kind of just bring it down to 2. It depends on, how you guys want to, report on that. And then basically we have some other options here. You can apply a specific time filter for it, but I'm going to leave that specific one on our out of the box 1 week time frame. But let's say I also want to report on the last 30 minutes in that case, right? And then this one's going to be called, if we go done here and then we edit it again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a title, a header right here. We'll do, this will be our kind of 1 week time frame SLO. We can go ahead and clone that, and we'll make this last 30 minutes. And then if you want, you can basically go ahead and clone these and change, change different time frames you want. Now that's one way to kind of show the trending, to trend in SLO, which a lot of customers really like there. But then if we go back to service level objectives, and if you actually click on this actions again, you actually view this SLI in the data explorer. So what it'll do is it'll actually punch in our SLI definition, which you see right here. So in this case, this is our acceptable over, for our booking finish or response time SLI. It'll punch that into the metric explorer here and just make a chart out of it. Now, this is really good if you want to just trend an SLI over time. Okay, so basically if you want to go to, I'll just go and keep it as a graph. You can change the colors and things like that, but I'm going to go ahead and pin that to my SLI or SLO dashboard. This will be booking acceptable over time. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit pin, open that dashboard, and this is a great view to just kind of sit there and trend over time if you want just more of a traditional kind of bar chart view. Now, what you can then do is I like to then take these and just kind of stack our SLOs. Once you're good with sort of a view, you can go in and edit to look at different SLOs, kind of in one view with different dimensions of analysis. So that's kind of how I like to start building out dashboards based on the different tiles that we have here. You can see the ways we can resize tiles. I think are really nifty. So what I want to do here is I want to resize these a little bit so I can place some of these views side by side. And I'll clone this a couple more times. And then what I'll do is clone this one more time. And, then maybe hit done. And then I would plug in my 4 different SLOs here, with different time frames to look at. And then also I could trend them over time. And then maybe perhaps I would put a honeycomb tile in here as well. So it's really quick and easy to create a dashboard view off of. This is just one example. That was pretty quick there, but it's highly customizable is the point here. You can actually even go in, and one last thing I'll show you is you can actually go in and take out some of these. So maybe I don't need to know all of the different details within, the last 30 minutes because it's already showing all of the different legend details and things in the week time frame. So highly customizable, easy to do. But that's pretty much it. That's all I kind of wanted to show, Andy. But yeah. Anything else? Any other points on your end, or?
No, I'm fascinated because especially about the 7 use cases that you showed, I think they were spot on. I also wanted to highlight maybe one more thing. You can obviously create all of this through the Dynatrace UI as you've shown. You can also automate all of that through our Dynatrace API. And on top of the API, we also provide Dynatrace Monaco, monitoring as code. And we've at Perform, we've also announced software intelligence as code. That's basically all part of this. So you can bake this into your development process so that as your developers are creating new services, as they are creating new endpoints, they can define in their code base their SLOs, and then your automation will automatically take care of configuring Dynatrace correctly so all of these SLOs are there. Right? And this is also what we're doing with Dynatrace Cloud Automation. We provide you also the automation framework around the automation of your Dynatrace configuration. So
absolutely,
it's really cool.
Great.
I think, Brian, I want to have you back, most likely, not most likely, but for sure, because I think that's a really cool session and a lot of great details. And I know that because there's so many things that are changing, we are constantly improving. We probably want to do these updates every couple of months and just say, hey, this is the latest things we learned, the latest product enhancements.
Yeah. And just to mention, we do have some, we have constantly blogging about this, this subject here. So, specifically for SLOs, we have 3 very recent ones here that you should check out. I think you might have been the author of one of these, Andy. I'm not sure, but and another one I think we might be doing a future webinar off of, but I won't tease too much there.
Exactly.
But yeah. So thanks for having me, and yeah, back anytime.
Thank you, Brian. Hey, for everybody else, thank you so much. If you have questions, reach out to us directly or through community.dynatrace.com. Start building your SLOs, getting in touch with us, and let's make the world a better SLO place. Right?
Awesome.
There we go.
Sounds good to me.
Bye-bye.
See ya.